Hello, everyone. It is a few minutes to noon, so we are just going to allow everyone to log in and get comfortable, and then we will start promptly at 12 o'clock. So until then, I am going to turn off my video, but I will be back in a few minutes. All right. So Jennifer, why don't we start off by talking about what AVDA's mission is?
So, AVDA's mission is to promote violence-free relationships and social change by offering alternative choices to end violence and domestic abuse.
Excellent. And since you also are a social change organization, I thought that we could maybe quickly just go through, what that means to AVDA. Like, what kind of definition of social change do you use?
Well, that's a big question. I think so we are looking to change the social norms in our culture that currently support the continuation of violence against women and girls in our society. So we're looking at changing the social norms to more equality in relationships versus a power over structure between this is not taking into consideration same-sex relationships, but in heterosexual relationships, the idea that a man has more power in the relationship, more control, more decision-making abilities or decision-making power in their relationship. And we're really trying to teach young people how to build and sustain healthy, equitable relationships so that when they engage in relationships, violence does not occur in the first place. We're also looking at changing the social structure around community and the way in which people perceive and intervene in domestic violence in the community. So the current social norm it's changing, but it's still in a lot of ways that domestic violence is their problem, their family, not my business, I'm not getting involved. When the reality is that domestic violence affects everyone in our community, right? We have over 13,000 acts of domestic violence taking place in the workplace each year. So you may not be going through it, but it may come onto your place of employment, right? It may be something that someone else is dealing with. We know people who are survivors or victims of domestic violence. We know perpetrators of domestic violence. We're trying to change that idea that if you hear something, you say something, you do something. That doesn't mean you go over and get involved in it. We want you to be safe too, but calling out for some law enforcement intervention or finding a time when you might be comfortable saying to the victim, hey, I know some resources for you. And then the big shift that we're looking for is in our culture is that men and boys start to stand up for those same systems of equality and denounce violence against women and girls very heavily, because it's very different. I've been in plenty of situations where I'm the one who's trying to say to a man making a derogatory joke about, I've had to make jokes about domestic violence, about violence against women, about women in general, about race, and I'm saying that this is really problematic. But if you already don't value the voice of a woman because you're making a joke that's derogatory towards them, I'm not really the venue that's going to change the way you think. And so getting other men to stand up and say, yo, guy, that's not cool. You can't really talk like that about women and girls. And that's not a joke because it happens to lots of women and girls in our community. So those are the kind of social changes that we're really seeking in the work that we're doing to end domestic and dating violence.
Okay, I think that's really helpful because, of course, we are, also a social change foundation, and I know that sometimes that phrase either means different things to different people, or people aren't really sure what we mean by social change. So I like to say that social change is really focused on prevention,
Absolutely.
whether that's through education or advocacy or policy or a change in the culture or all of those things. That's really what we're talking about. So, and AVDA is focused on both social change, but you also provide direct services, right?
Correct. So our organization opened 34 years ago with a 24-hour hotline and an emergency shelter for survivors of domestic violence. And while we are very dedicated to social change and preventing domestic and dating violence, those intervention services are critical in our society until we are able to really eliminate this public health epidemic in our culture. So we currently have we still operate our 24-hour hotline. We have our emergency shelter has grown over the 34 years from 12 beds to 64 beds. We added a 2-year transitional housing program back in 2005, where we have 8 units of transitional housing for survivors to rebuild financially, employment-wise, looking for stable housing. Lots of our survivors in that program, my cat's about to walk on screen. Lots of our survivors in that program are navigating the immigration system because the person who abused them was promising to, apply for their adjusted status in this country based on their marriage, and then held all their papers and kept all of their documents in order for them to go through that process. And so they're having to pick that up under the Violence Against Women Act to move forward with that. So they're needing the extra time in order to go through those lengthy processes. We also have a full-scale outreach program. So all of the services that we provide, in shelter and transitional housing, we have yoga, we have advocacy, we have what people traditionally would consider case management, helping them to move through the barriers of whatever housing, employment, economics that they may be dealing with, childcare, transportation. So all of those services are available through our outreach program for anyone who is not seeking residential programming, but still needs help accessing injunctions for protection, navigating the child welfare system, dealing with the sexual assault response team if there was high levels of sexual assault in the context of the domestic violence. So all of those services are available through our outreach program as well.
It's amazing. And then you also have on the other side, your prevention work, right, with education.
Correct. So we have, thanks to funding from Jewish Women's Foundation, as well as other funders, we have 3 violence prevention educators. We have all 3 of our violence prevention educators are certified as trainers. They to train other individuals how to implement the Coaching Boys into Men curriculum. So that's out of Futures Without Violence, which I know is another organization that Jewish Women's Foundation supports nationally.
Yes, and we actually fund Coaching Boys into Men.
Yes, absolutely. So they've all become certified trainers, and they're able to implement that and train coaches to implement Coaching Boys into Men locally, to engage men through their athletic teams, young men through their sports. We have the co-part to that is Future Leaders for Young Women. We're running that in Atlantic High School with the Girls Cheerleading Squad. We have our own curriculum that we developed with help from our state coalition to run mixed gendered programmings in classroom settings. And that all of these programs follow the Centers for Disease Control's model to prevent intimate partner violence. So we're looking at educating young people, right? And I did this work for a while, so I'll tell you some of the funny things I used to tell the young people. When we finish our curriculum, I would look at them and go, with the 20, 25 students in the room, and I would say, cool, so now if you date each other, you're probably gonna be safe, right? If everybody implements everything you just learned, you're probably gonna, you're safe in this relationship. And they go, oh, I'm not dating anybody in here. Like, great. So what are you going to do now with the information that you have so that this goes further into your community and more people are likely to be safe dating partners? And so we engage them in community impact projects. We had 18 youth one year teach 2 sessions of teen dating violence information to 1,800 of their peers.
Amazing.
They do This year, the students at Atlantic High did a health fair on their campus where they hosted the health fair and they set up different tables on different topics. It was peer-to-peer support with the provider sort of in the background if there were any questions that were challenging for the youth to handle from their peers. So they come up, and when you give young people the power, which is what I absolutely love about your young grant makers program, is that I just love it. When you give young people the power to make decisions and you let them drive what's going to best impact their community, they do the most amazing things. And when they tell us what they want to do, when they told me they wanted to teach 15 to 1,800 of their peers in 2 days, in my head, I was like, this can't be done. It's not possible, right? But you don't say that because that's us coming from, how are we going to do this? And when you let them go and figure that out, they made it work. It was unbelievable. So that's some of the work that we're doing there. We're doing a lot of media literacy so that they can critically consume the media that's being pushed at them, and really, instead of just sort of absorbing it and repeating the same, because our media is reinforcing those same social norms that are very pro, control and aggression of violence against women and girls.
Right.
So we have the media literacy component so that they can critically consume media. And we have some young people who are also making their own media themselves. They are producing songs out of the 505 Teen Center's recording studio. So they're starting to create their own positive messaging out in society.
That's amazing. So talking about specifically these prevention programs with teens, can you tell us a little bit more about like what goes into those programs, how you find those teens, like kind of what the makeup of those teens are? We're talking about high school students, middle school students, boys, girls, non-binary.
All of the above, literally. So we have boys only groups running out of the 505 Teen Center. We have them out of Milagro Center, the Lake Worth Youth Empowerment Center. We have Men of Strength clubs that are licensed from Men Can Stop Rape out of DC, running at Atlantic High and Boynton High. We have the Future Leaders girls programming running at Atlantic High right now. We do a lot of community outreach to teachers in the PE programs because that's where the health component is supposed to be implemented. And
that's in Palm Beach County, right? All of these programs are within Palm Beach County.
Correct. This is in Palm Beach County. Yes. We work with the AVID classes, which is a class to prepare them for college note-taking and studying skills and things. But there's room in there for us to do our work with some of the teachers in the AVID programs. So we're kind of wherever we can get in. Boynton High is a big school, Atlantic High, Spanish River High School. Middle schoolers, we find more at community locations than we do in the middle schools. When the I've been doing this work in Palm Beach County since 2003. Started with AVDA in 2001, working as the children's advocate in the shelter. But my primary...
Almost 20 years.
Yeah.
That's amazing. You must have
my primary passion, thank you. My primary passion though was I did a year of this work in New York first, and I did the violence prevention programming up there. So in 2003, when that position opened, I went in there. At that time, health was mandated. So there were middle schools that we could get into no problem. The challenge is once these health teacher positions were really not involved, we actually are finding that it's a little more challenging to take away from the academic times in those middle school years. So we're trying to engage the youth more in community centers at that age, because it is research based that 11 to 14 is really where we want to be.
To have the best outcome in terms of prevention?
Correct, because the CDC is looking at the 11 to 14-year-olds as that age where domestic and dating violence, I should say, because it's really dating at that point, they're more likely to have never been a victim and never have perpetrated by that point. And so we're trying primary prevention, and our social change program is trying to prevent it from ever happening in the first place. It doesn't mean that high school students are, you know, they're not a lost cause. I mean, adults are not, you know, everybody can learn and change and grow, right? But that's why we want to try to reach some more middle school students as well.
Okay. And about how many, I guess, you know, teens do you think in any given year you are working with or having an impact on as it relates to these particular programs?
So we are seeing about 1,200 unduplicated students running through our long-term programming, and that can be anywhere from 9 to 22 sessions depending on the program that we're running.
Okay.
So that's a lot when you multiply that by the number of times that we're seeing them, and the fact that some of them we're doing the curriculum with, and then we're staying with them for months after that to help them create their community impact projects.
Okay.
And then we also still do our, you know, risk reduction, secondary prevention, educational presentations. So we're probably seeing a couple thousand youth where we're going into one-time presentations to just give them an overview of what this issue is. We're certainly using those to engage youth in the conversation, get them kind of excited about what prevention really looks like, and kind of get the teachers and the leaders of these youth groups on board to invest the time in the longer term programming, because we know that that's what changes outcomes.
Sure. And how many schools do you think are represented by this group of teens?
I think we're in, I feel like it's 3 or 4 right now.
Okay. That's great. And so I imagine there must be some kind of evaluation that you do to measure, you know, efficacy for these programs. So, you know, what can you tell us about like long-term evaluations to see, you know, whether or not like these programs are having an impact on preventing violence?
Right. So we have a pre and post survey, and it's really about their knowledge, attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors. So we're assessing like, you know, a little bit about what you know about the issue, but it's really less about that and more about, you know, do you believe that this is respectful? Like a statement, for example, I believe if a man has the right to hit his partner, right? His wife would really technically was the question, I think. It's a statement. And so you're agreeing or disagreeing on this array of statements. And then we're doing that again at the end of the sessions. So again, it could be at the end of 9 sessions. We have one that's 16 and one that's 22. And at the end of those programs, we're going to run that again. And so what we're seeing is, you know, I see a question on the from Dina Lockman on the QA about to confirm you're reducing domestic violence. The longer term component to that would be, and we don't have access to the youth, you know, a year later or 2 years later, but that would be nice to be able to have, you know, that's a whole research set of dollars and component, right, that we don't have the capacity to do. But what we are seeing in the programming results that we do have is that students are really shifting a lot around they're moving the needle on their ideas that jealousy is totally okay and normal and a way to express that I love and care about you, to, oh, wow, that jealousy is problematic and controlling and manipulative, and that I need to create a different structure within my relationship in order for me to communicate that I want to be with you, and it would be sad if you broke up with me, but I don't have the right to force you through my jealousy to not talk to other people. So we're seeing the needle move there, which is great. We're also seeing the needle move in the idea that those gender norms, so the idea that men are X and women are Y, and this is how you're supposed to act and behave and talk and think and look in order to fit into these boxes. We're doing a lot of work to break that down so that people can just truly be themselves, and that if you want to date someone who is this, then you look for that. But that doesn't mean everyone has to be that person, right? And allowing that freedom of choice to express yourselves in any way possible, which is also helping our non-binary youth, our LGBT youth, because they're feeling more supported in allowing, like, they're seeing that as we break down these conversations, their peers are more open to people coming out with, I might not be exactly like you, or the social standard that you, this social construct of who you expect me to be because
Right.
of my body parts.
Right. Yeah, I think that's really important because I would imagine that particularly boys, let's say, who subscribe to these traditional ideas about masculinity are, you know, I would think vulnerable to falling into patterns of violence or really unhealthy behavior within relationships.
Absolutely. I will never forget the day that I was standing in front of a high school class and this boy raises his hand and says, well, in my family, we were raised to believe that if our girlfriend, you know, cheated on us, then we have the right to kill her. And students say inflammatory things all the time to like goat me in these presentations, right? So I'm totally thinking, I was like, ha ha ha, funny. And he dead serious goes, no, that's the way I was raised, right? And I'm standing there realizing that there's not a whole, I mean, we're going to work, you know, through, but this is a group setting. He's come from a lot of family structures that have given him that this is the way it is, right? This is what I was taught. And I'm realizing that I'm not going to necessarily break that down in 9 sessions, right?
Sure.
So I simply stated at that point, okay, well, if I can't change the way you're going to think about that, can I at least ask you this? When you date somebody, do you let them know on the upfront, hey, listen, just so you know, this is what I believe, because that woman might not want to take that risk in a relationship with you. And she might want to say, you know what, that's cool. I'm going to go somewhere else, right? And the kids in the room kind of laughed like, oh, that's funny. Why would we do that? It got us on a really good conversation about communication, right? And really communicating your belief systems and your boundaries and your likes and your dislikes, because if you're not having those conversations, then you're not structuring this relationship from the beginning to determine whether or not it could work for you.
Right. Yeah, I think that's so important. So I want to just ask some questions about AVDA kind of more broadly.
Sure.
So obviously we are in a pretty challenging time right now, and with everything that's happening around COVID-19, I'm seeing, you know, different stats coming from different organizations about domestic violence being kind of on the rise, or incidents have increased since we've all been, you know, basically forced to stay at home. So what are you seeing around that? You know, what do you see as the impact of this on your clients, on just overall on your work?
So we have had a couple of these community conversations, and we've learned not only nationally, because that's been all over the news, but locally here, we are seeing some of the same trends with law enforcement saying that their domestic violence calls are up about 19% here in Palm Beach County. Well, that came from Palm Beach Sheriff's Office.
Okay.
We are not seeing that on the hotline.
Okay.
What we're actually seeing is the numbers slightly drop from our typical number of hotline calls. And the way in which that connects is because survivors are not necessarily right now the ones that are calling law enforcement. It's the neighbor, right, that hears what's going on. It's the concerned citizen who's worried, and law enforcement are going out. And if they're not able, if it's and the sergeant we were working with was talking about them mostly being domestic disturbances. And on a domestic disturbance, you're not going to arrest somebody, right? And so if you're not arresting somebody, then they're staying inside with their perpetrator, right? That just because it's a disturbance and you can't arrest somebody doesn't mean domestic violence as a whole is not occurring in that home.
Sure.
So if they're not arresting somebody, how is that victim getting away from the perpetrator to be able to call for help?
Right.
We also have been doing everything we can to push out the message that we're still open. We don't want people to think that everybody staying home means that we're not available, because we are. We are still responding 24/7. We are still bringing people into our emergency shelter if they need it. We are still doing new intakes for outreach. The courthouse is still open for certain things, one of them being the domestic violence injunctions, right? So you can still apply for a domestic violence injunction for protection. So that's an important message to get out so that people don't fear calling thinking they're not going to get help or a response. We have seen, I've seen some more emails. We get those like contact us through our website, right? So we've seen more of those coming in, and we're doing some, you never know who's on the other end of that email. Right. You also don't know who's reading those emails, right? Because in an abusive relationship, their technology is also usually being controlled or monitored. So we're cautious about the kinds of things we're saying and over the emails, but we're also trying to make sure that we're helping them to think about a safe way to get away from the partner so we can have that phone call and really connect them with the right service that they need. So we've done a lot of that work too. We're not up and running yet, but we're looking into, some other sort of text chat line options. But we don't want to do anything that is going to with technology, because there are a lot of safety risks around technology that are going to jeopardize the survivors. So we have taken in, I'm happy to say, because we do have to social distance at the shelter. So we're not taking in less people. I guess we sort of are. We're trying not to fill our beds. When we are full at 64 beds at our capacity, we have multiple families sharing a bedroom. So we're trying not to do that for the health of everyone. But we have brought in 14 new survivors and their children during this time into our shelter. We are providing catered meals so that they do not have to cook in a communal kitchen, so that people can safely socially distance from each other. We took our old race t-shirts that we weren't using from our Race for Hope in January, and we got rubber bands, and we used the Surgeon General's video to show them how to cut up and make your own mask, because you couldn't get stuff right away. So we're being really creative with how we provide services. Our support groups, I won't say this because we're recording and we're going to push out, so I won't say exactly how we're doing it, but we are running our support groups for survivors through our outreach program by the phone, in a way that if anyone intercepted that call, they would not know who's on the call, what organization is running it, and it doesn't sound like a domestic violence group. So it's really interesting the way our staff have been very creative.
That's amazing. I think that you all just do such important work.
Thank you.
How many staff people do you have? Like, kind of, what's the structure of AVDA?
So we have our CEO. We have 3 directors, development programs, myself, and a business operations director. We have 3 residential services managers. So they help to cover management on a 24-hour basis. There's times where they're not there, but we have more days, evenings, and then overnights for management. We have an outreach services manager. In outreach, we have 5 victim advocates and 3 educators. In shelter, we have a lot of victim advocates. I don't exactly know that number off the top of my head, but we are mandated to have 2 people on staff 24/7, regardless. We typically have more, because with 64 women and children plus our transitional housing program, we need staff to provide the services and the support that the women and children need. 3 of our advocates, we have labeled them the activities team. Mm-hmm. And they're the ones who facilitate a lot of the support groups, especially for varying ages of the children. So they're creating a calendar at the beginning of every month that they post. Mm-hmm. And the women in the program and the children can go and look at the big calendar on the wall and say, oh, I really want to go to that group. So they're doing We Fit with the video game, mm-hmm. or they're doing a yoga class, or we have Zumba, or we're doing a vision board group, or we're doing a budgeting and economic self-sufficiency group, or we're doing sort of a domestic violence like processing group, right? So they're all psychoeducational. We're not therapists, but we're able to help them sort of heal from the stuff that they're going through. We have, and then we have our whole finance, IT, sure. HR, development. So we're getting close to 50 employees now.
That's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to talk about domestic violence as an issue that, I think that there's constantly education being done around domestic violence or intimate partner violence. I know historically there had been, shame around the issue, and I think that that's probably an issue that still persists for a lot of people. So I want to just maybe dive a little bit deeper around domestic violence more broadly in that, what do you think people should know about domestic violence in terms of like who's being affected and, what it looks like? Just maybe some myths around domestic violence that maybe you think that would be worth addressing.
Sure. I think as far as who it affects, the myth that's been out there, and again, in 20 years, I've seen some movement in this particular myth towards more factual information. But the myth that's out there, I think, still pretty heavily is that it happens to a certain population of people. The idea that it happens to people who are uneducated, that are from minority communities, that are impoverished. And the reality is that it happens everywhere. The difference sometimes is the access to resources, right? But then, and one of the things that's interesting is people say, well, how do you prove that when, a lot of your income levels for the survivors when they come into the program is zero? Well, that doesn't mean they might not be working, but that doesn't mean that's where they came from, right? So their family income prior to leaving an abusive situation was whatever it was. It could be low, it could be middle, it could be high. But when they leave, they were denied all of the access to those family resources. They were denied the ability to work. So when they come to us, their income is zero because they do not have their partner's income, right?
Right.
So we see a lot of that. We want to make sure that people understand it happens in all races, all ages. But for sure, the predominant age range is 15 to 44. That is definitely proven. With the highest rate of intimate partner violence per capita is between 16 and 24, right? So now we're talking about folks who are young. They're getting information from their friends. These are not the people who are, running to their parents because they're trying to display independence and make their own decisions. And so sometimes they're getting poor information from the people that they're accessing support from. Another big component of what we do in our prevention programs too, right? Making sure that youth, if they have someone disclose that that's what's going on, know how to direct them to the right support systems. So they're also not necessarily able to access an injunction for protection without their parents' permission, right? Depending on age. So it's really interesting to try to work with young people around those obstacles. So that's, I think, the biggest myth that's out there around who it happens to. Right. And it happens in all socioeconomic levels, right? It's literally everywhere. One of the interesting things, and I always preface this by saying that my mom passed of breast cancer. So I'm in no way minimizing the issues that breast cancer has with women in our society. But if you look at the CDC's website, you'll see that it's 1 in 8 women will have breast cancer. And it's 1 in 4 who will experience intimate partner violence, right? So it's double the rate of all of those women. So imagine, because domestic violence is this like in-home family, keep it a secret, it's their business, not mine, right? That social structure. Think about the number of women who are out at these breast cancer rallies, and think about the number of women who are sharing their stories openly, right? And they're on stage, and we're, seeing them in droves come up as the survivors at the end of these walks, right? Sure. Double that if we had the same ability, and because it's you can't really do that with domestic violence. It's just come out and say it was me, it happened to, right? Because there's security and safety issues that have to be taken into consideration. But imagine doubling that number at all these breast cancer rallies. That's how many women are affected by domestic violence, right? Sure. So it's massive. Another myth that I think is really important to dispel is the idea that some folks have that, like, well, it's a big deal. It's bad. It shouldn't happen. But if the woman would just leave, right, then it's over. Like, so I think that's one we often hear. Why doesn't she just leave? Right. So 2 things to that. One is the reality of that situation is that we know that the most dangerous time for a woman in an abusive relationship is any time where she takes back any control or power. Okay. So when she's making the decision to leave, if she's planning, she's in the process, or she's already left, she is at higher risk of being killed at that time than any other in that relationship. So assuming that a woman's just going to pick up and go and everything's going to be fine, that guy's not leaving her alone. That's not the end of it.
Right.
That's why women are coming to a confidential shelter, because they know when they leave, they're going to be hunted and they're going to be looked for, and it's dangerous. And they have to make the right plans for themselves to navigate the abuser that they have, and only they know what's going to work and what's not going to work. So all of our work is driven by the narrative of the survivor and what they know will work for them, or what they feel, because I don't know that anybody can know for sure, but what they feel is going to be best for them. The other flip side to that conversation, or that question about why doesn't she just leave or why does she stay, is that talk about social change. When is our society going to start asking more than that? Why does he do that to her? Why does he think he has the right to abuse his partner? Right. Why is he doing that? And that's when we're really going to see a shift in domestic violence and the rates reducing. Because when the focus is, listen,
right.
If I go out, I had this conversation with someone the other day. We were thinking, I guess, COVID times or whatever. Let's say my son and I are walking down the street because we have nothing else to do. So we take a walk down the street, right? If somebody physically attacks me in front of my child on the street, nobody's going to say, you're a bad mother, you exposed him to that abuse, which is sometimes what victims hear when they have children in these situations. Right. Nobody's going to ever think that I shouldn't walk down the street with my son for exercise or to get a breath of fresh air, right? The whole focus is going to be on, that's insane. I can't believe someone did that to you.
Right.
And that's the same response we need for domestic violence.
Right. No, I totally agree with you. So talking about, domestic violence myths, I mean, so from what I understand, the rate of domestic violence is about the same in same-sex relationships. And men are also, even within heterosexual relationships, the victims of domestic abuse, right? Wouldn't you say that's something that you've seen?
Yes. So we know that the rates of intimate partner violence, regardless of who you are in a relationship with, are about the same, right? So your likelihood of being a victim in an abusive relationship is about the same. So we're seeing the LGBT community somewhere between, and of course, there's certainly more research on one end than there is on another because of resources and whatnot. But what they're saying in the LGBT community is it's somewhere between like 25 and 33%. And they're right at about 33% for heterosexual relationships. So the prevalence rate of intimate partner violence is the same, regardless of your sexual orientation, gender. Now, what we do see as a difference, though, is that when we do know that women abuse male partners, right? And that does happen, and it is terrible. But what we also know about it's about 7.5% of the cases, and you have to remember these are law enforcement cases, right? That are going into the systems to track a lot of this stuff. But these women getting arrested for abusing their male partners, about half of those women, if you look at the context of the relationship, who has the power, who has the control in the relationship, she is actually the victim in the domestic violence. But today she had enough. So she hit him back. And then she got arrested because the second we lay our hands on them, we've committed the same crime, right? From the law enforcement perspective. But in the dynamics of ongoing power and control, that's what we are seeing. So we need to address the fact that yes, men are victims of domestic violence. The LGBTQ community experiences domestic violence at the same rates as heterosexual individuals. So it's really important that we're working to ensure that everyone is safe in our community. And that is why the anti-oppression work that we do to create equality in our society is so important. Because the whole idea about, if I think that you are less valuable than me, then what we know is those groups of people experience more violence against them.
Right. No, that's very powerful to think about it that way. So on a maybe more, optimistic note, as someone who has been, working around this issue for almost 20 years, what kind of I guess, improvements have you seen around domestic violence, if any? Hopefully you've seen some improvements.
Oh, how do you do this work for 20 years if you don't see anything, getting better?
Yes. Right.
I am I've touched on it a few times, like where I've seen moving the needle on some of the myths. I do think that we are certainly in the last 2 years since the Me Too movement, more and more people are talking about this. More survivors are feeling safe and comfortable to maybe not tell everybody, but to reach out for help and to find support. I remember, and this is not necessarily positive, but I'll get to the positive. I remember when the whole Janae Rice situation happened with him as an NFL player, and he abused her in the elevator that was caught on tape.
Right.
And I know this because I remember just watching it, right? And I thought, if you would have asked me, I think at that time it was like 17 or 16 years prior that I had started this work, and I would tell everybody, if you asked me 16 years ago if we would ever have a 3-week national media conversation about domestic violence, I would have told you you're crazy. This is not happening. It will never happen. And I sat there just in awe, not because I didn't want something bad to happen to someone. That's not the point. But the change is that it got media coverage and national media coverage, and they held on to it, and they talked about it, and they dissected it on different programs, and they talked about all the different dynamics and the contextual pieces of domestic violence on national media. And I thought, I can't believe this is happening, right? Especially with somebody who's in sports. These are people that folks look up to and don't want to badmouth and, want to say, oh, well, it wasn't that bad, and minimize it and shove it out the door. So that has changed. We're getting more, it goes in waves though. I noticed some things that still get left under the rug, but we're getting more comfortable calling out what's really going on around this issue and talking about it a little bit more openly and publicly. I have definitely seen young men shift in the way they approach, especially a woman, when we come into our classroom to try to do this work.
Okay. Can you give an example?
I absolutely can. I was in New York doing a presentation in a gymnasium, and because it was in the gym, students were allowed to sit on the bleachers wherever they wanted to go. And about 13 to 15 boys sat in the top of the bleachers, back all together, lined up together. And I might have been 3.5 minutes into just explaining the organization and what our topic was. It was a 45-minute in, out the door, like not a lot of room for too much chat, but I like to connect with the students if they have questions. And one of the boys, supported by all of the boys on the top, because they were all buddies and they all thought this was funny, said that the only reason that I was there, and forgive me because it's not my way of talking, but was because I'm a man-hating lesbian. And they all thought that was hysterical, because it came from, you don't like men because I'm talking about keeping women and girls safe, right? And I don't personally find that as much anymore. I think that that's progress, right? That because those boys now will be, 38. So yeah, they'd be about 36, 37 years old, right? So now our younger men and boys are willing to have these conversations a little bit more openly and not come from a place of the assumption that I'm here to attack you,
right,
because other men do this, right? So that has shifted. I do remember too, at one of our first prevention curriculum sessions that we did, the first, not one of, the first, we piloted at Boynton High in the leadership class. And I went in all excited because I thought, this is finally what we need to be doing, this longer, deeper conversation around these issues. And I kind of explained to them on the first session what we were going to do and how this was going to look for the next 9 weeks and the change we were going to be able to create. And the students kind of just looked at me and said, no, that's not going to work. And I totally sucked the wind out of me. And I said, what? And so we had a conversation. I actually went back and talked to some state coalition reps, and I said, you know, what do I do? And they said, scratch session 2, go in, sit down and say, okay, if this was going to work, what would you need? What would we need to do here? And let them get some buy-in, right? And so I said, okay, fine, I'll do whatever you tell me because I want this to work. And I went in, sat down, did that. And at the end of that, I said, okay, so I'm going to go back to my office and rewrite my curriculum to meet your needs. I didn't have to rewrite anything. They gave me everything that was in the curriculum, right? But they needed that buy-in to drive what this conversation was going to look like.
Sure.
So I said, okay, I'm going to go back to my office. I'm going to work up this curriculum. I'm going to adjust things a little bit. And at the end of that class, one of the male students said to me, all right, miss, I still don't think you can do what you want to do, but we're going to roll with you. And I was like, I'll take it. Right. So they're really engaging differently, I think, than they were when I first started this work. And maybe we're doing the work differently. Maybe we're doing it better than we were 20 years ago, you know, and we're definitely coming from a framework of youth engagement rather than telling youth what to do. So lots of positive things has happened. And I sustain myself in this work because I know this kind of violence is preventable. And I know we are funded by great organizations with the same mission like Jewish Women's Foundation. We are doing the work that is going to put this issue to rest, right? Change takes time. If you look at the decline, it was the public health model for smoking cessation that we use as our example to show the rates of change. If you look at that, it took many, 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 many years, right? A couple decades for smoking cessation to really decline, okay? In addition to that, people still smoke, right? But we see a major decline in that issue. We're on the cusp of doing that work. The public health model to prevent intimate partner violence only started in 2002. It started in 14 states across the country. It's now in almost every state across the country. We're only 18 years into this. We're gonna make the changes in the headway that we need to make. That is why I can do this and get up every day, because I know that our young people are becoming activists and social change agents themselves, and they are learning from leaders like you all about how to, you know, make great grant choices and who to fund and what programs work, and how to read about, you know, grants and really dive into that. They're creating their own rallies and marches and social media calls to action. So that's what I have goosebumps literally talking about these young people. I love it. So,
well, I really appreciate your optimism because I think it is helpful to hear that from someone who is doing this work day in and day out. And you're right, social change does take a long time because we're talking about, you know, changing attitudes and things that have been, you know, long accepted and perpetuated in any particular society. So I'm glad, you know, that you think that we are moving in the right direction. And we, of course, are certainly happy to be supporting all of your important work. I'm just going to have a reminder. So we've got 10 minutes left. If anyone has any questions, to please submit them through the Q&A button. So something I'm wondering about AVDA, like many of our other grantees, what other organizations do you work with in the community to really accomplish the work that you're trying to do?
On the direct service side of our work, we are heavily reliant on our other social service providers in the community that are meeting, you know, we try to be a one-stop shop, but we're not a jack of all trades, right? We rely heavily on the Legal Aid Society of Palm Beach County to file those injunctions for protections for survivors, to represent them in court. We go with them for moral support and safety considerations, but we're not attorneys, right? We need somebody fighting for the rights of those survivors. We rely heavily on them for divorces and custody issues and whatnot. We work very closely, let me not jump all over the place. Intervention. So for our direct services, we work very closely with Dress for Success to access some of their programming, as well as the interview clothing and being able to get ready for, you know, the workforce. They leave everything behind a lot of times when they come into our shelter. I'll never forget the family that came in bathing suits and flip-flops because that was the moment in time she had an opportunity to escape, and that's all they had with them. Those are important services. We rely on our mental health organization partners because at the end of the day, another myth I think that we'll dispel in this conversation. The victim is not causing domestic violence to occur to them because they have mental health issues. But when you experience trauma over time, there are impacts of that trauma on your emotional health. And so it doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to end up with some long-term diagnoses, but having that crisis counseling, helping them to get through, you know, process the trauma and move forward. So we rely heavily on those organizations in our community. Some survivors of domestic violence are self-medicating with drugs and alcohol in order to survive this, right? And no judgment there. I get it. But when they get to safety, they decide they don't need that coping mechanism anymore. And so we can help them with treatment options if they're looking for that. So we're really tapped into working with lots of other social service providers to meet the wide array of needs that may come through our door. So that's really important. For our prevention work, we have a cooperative agreement with the school district, and we comply with all of their guidelines so that our staff can have we get background screened by our agency, but our educators get background screened also by the district. And then we end up with a vendor ID badge so that we have permission to be on their campuses, which we have to wear at all times. We partner with different organizations. So like I said, we're working very collaboratively with the 505 Teen Center, where the youth are going through, these young men went through our programs, and new ones will soon. And then their 505 Teen Center staff who are with them are also participating in facilitation of the curriculum and the conversations. And so they can then carry that through the things that the young men are doing or saying or talking about when we're not there, right? And then they're supported because they have their recording studio on site. They're supporting us and working with the youth and creating that media. So it's really a really amazing collaborative effort. I know our educator, LaWanda, she's so cool. She connected with someone, and I don't have all the details memorized, but she connected with someone who works for a social service organization doing cooking classes or nutrition classes. And this woman, they connected, and now LaWanda goes out and teaches at the cooking class. This kind of healthy relationship information, right? And so it's this very innovative way of tapping into what's already out there and what educational services generally are there for the organizations, for the community, and where do our goals align, right? Where do we have shared visions for the health of our community, and how can we work together towards a common goal? So we have a lot of community partners that we work very closely with.
That's amazing. Yeah.
I would be remiss in saying if I didn't say this. Jewish Family Services, Ruth and Norman Rails, Jewish Family Services, is a great collaborator with our organization. They have staff who come to our residential program once a week, and they have the ability to provide like a communication support group if we have survivors who are wanting to do that. And they also help our survivors with the financial resources to move on after shelter. They help women tremendously to be able to, we can cost millions to run this organization a year, right? But these women have to keep the doors of our shelter open, right? Just low, and then fed, and all of their needs, all the basic needs met. So to have a community partner that can come in and say, I can help them with half their rent deposit, or I can help them with, getting a double baby stroller because they're pregnant with twins, right? Just amazing things that they're able to do. So we greatly appreciate that collaborative relationship as well.
Yeah, that's amazing.
They're also delivering, their food bank delivers once every other week, I think, or once a week. They deliver food from their food bank to our transitional housing residents. And there was one other thing I was thinking of that I was gonna, forgive me.
It'll come to you.
Yeah, they're just great. They're amazing.
I'm glad to hear it. How many, I guess, women clients do you think that you are assisting on average, I guess, in any given year?
We serve so shelter, we serve just over 400 women and children a year, and half of them are adults and half of them are children. So we're serving about 200 women. Some are single, a lot have children, and so for about 400 women and children in shelter a year.
Mm-hmm.
We are serving 8 families in transitional housing a year at our current capacity. Like our capacity would be 32 people total in that program. But if your family size has less people than the number of beds in your room, we're not using all of them. It's about 8 families. It is 8 families a year.
Okay.
We also serve just over 300 women, men, and a couple of those folks in our outreach program are also children. Okay. So last year was about 38 children and about 10 men and the rest, about 330 adult survivors of domestic violence through our outreach programs. Okay. And then we're reaching thousands through the hotline takes in about 3,100 calls a year. 3,100 calls a year. And we're reaching out to, we follow up on police reports that are sent to us by local law enforcement. And we made just over 1,000 calls to victims on police reports last year to try to offer them services and bring them in for whatever support they needed after a law enforcement intervention.
Mm-hmm. And you would say you have a good relationship with local law enforcement.
We do. We really do. We have our local law enforcement to our center serves on our board of directors. We work very closely with the Palm Beach Sheriff's Office Domestic Violence Unit, where they have specific sergeant detectives and advocates in their departments. We've had the Boynton Beach Police Department do a diaper and wipe drive during May for Mother's Day a couple years in a row. It's about relationships. In 2011, we had an anti-stalking collaborative grant. We ran that for about 4.5 years, and that was very heavily law enforcement based, right? I need them to help us prove that this victim is being stalked. So it's really about relationship building and making sure that everyone realizes we're coming from the same space, even though we have different roles in the system, and that's to keep our communities safe and healthy.
So if anyone who is participating in this webinar needs support or knows someone that needs support, what's the best way for them to get in contact with you or with someone at AVDA?
So our 24-hour hotline is really the best way. We can support survivors. We can also talk to friends and family, concerned citizens about how to help someone if they were to be struggling with how to connect with someone. And our hotline is 1-800-355-8547. If somebody does need to use any sort of online connection with us, again, we don't really provide a lot of electronic service because of that whole safety and confidentiality right now until we dig more into other options. But we do have our website to gather information, which is AVDA, AVDA, online, all one word, .org. AVDAonline.org is our website. And somebody could put a question or a comment in the contact us box, and we'll do the best we can, considering safety, to be able to reply and answer questions.
Right, and the hotline is also listed on the website.
The hotline is listed on the website, and from your cell phone, you can click to call, and it'll take you right there.
We are just coming up on 1 o'clock, so I want to thank Jennifer so much for all of your information, and also just for everything that you have done and do to help women and girls who are dealing with domestic violence. AVDA is, I think, a tremendous organization. So thank you, and we're really proud to support what you're doing.
Thanks so much, Jennifer. I appreciate the time to help us spread our message.
Of course. And thank you to everyone for joining us for another Impact Tuesdays. If you are interested in learning more about our work, our website is jwfpalmbeach.org. And I do want to highlight that during this time, JWF did decide to create a special campaign, which is running between now and the end of the month, to raise funds to help all of our local grantees, AVDA included, to provide emergency funds around what's happening with the coronavirus. So if you're interested in donating, you can call our office at 561-275-2200, or of course visit our website again at jwfpalmbeach.org. So we will have another Impact Tuesdays next week at noon. So I hope to see you there. Registration information is on our website, on Facebook. I hope everyone is healthy and staying well, and I look forward to seeing you soon. So thank you.